Cowboy went out hunting, but instead of meat, he came back with a wounded Apache woman. Wild West. The Wild West stretched out before him, endless plains broken only by rocky hills and clusters of twisted, stubborn trees. The air was crisp, carrying the smell of dry grass and dust, and the faint scent of wildflowers that stubbornly clung to the soil. A lone cowboy, tall and lean, adjusted his wide-brimmed hat and took a deep breath. Today, like many others, he had set out with one simple goal: hunting. He was a man used to solitude. Years spent riding alone through these harsh lands had made him cautious, but also deeply aware of the beauty hidden in the wild. Every rustle of the grass, every movement of the birds, every distant sound of water in a creek could mean something important. To him, the wilderness was not just a place to find food. It was a place to test one's skills, patience, and endurance. He loved the quiet, the freedom, and the sense of control that came from surviving on his own. His horse, a strong chestnut stallion with a white stripe down its nose, walked steadily beside him as he scanned the landscape. The cowboy carried a rifle across his shoulder and a small leather pack with essentials: a few cans of food, a water flask, a blanket, and a small first aid kit. His eyes, sharp and alert, scanned the rolling hills, looking for signs of deer or other game. Every footprint in the dirt, every broken branch, every patch of disturbed grass told a story if you knew how to read it. He had been following the tracks of a buck for several miles now. The deer had wandered from the creek through a thicket of trees and out into an open plain. The cowboy moved slowly, each step deliberate and silent. He had learned long ago that haste often scared the prey away. Patience, he knew, was as valuable a skill as accuracy with a rifle. As he crept through the grass, he thought about the life he led. There were no towns nearby, no friends, no family. His companions were the animals, the wind, and the endless horizon. For some, such a life would feel lonely. For him, it felt natural, like breathing. Suddenly, a sound broke the quiet of the morning. It was faint at first, just a rustling in the brush, but then it grew louder. The cowboy froze, instinctively crouching behind a small ridge. The sound was not like the movement of deer or other animals. It was sharper, more human, an urgent cry followed by a low, painful groan. His heart beat a little faster, but he forced himself to stay calm. Out here in the wild, danger could appear without warning, and panic rarely helped. He peeked over the ridge carefully, trying to locate the source. His eyes scanned the landscape, a small ravine carved into the earth, bordered by jagged rocks. And there, moving slowly and carefully, was a figure. At first, he could not see clearly, but then he noticed the figure was a woman, crouched low to the ground. She moved with difficulty, one leg bent awkwardly beneath her. The sunlight glinted off her dark hair as she tried to drag herself forward. The sight made him hesitate. She was not one of the settlers or travelers he occasionally encountered. The clothes she wore were different, made of soft leather with intricate patterns, signs of her being from a native tribe. For a moment he considered ignoring her, leaving her to manage on her own. It would have been easier, safer. But something in her eyes, the sheer desperation and fear, pulled at him. The cowboy had seen suffering before, and though he rarely acted out of compassion, he could not simply turn away. He had made a choice. Sometimes, even in the harshest lands, doing the right thing meant risking your own safety. He approached cautiously, keeping low and silent. Every step was measured. He needed to make sure he was not putting himself in immediate danger. Out here, misunderstandings could be deadly. He remembered stories of skirmishes between settlers and Apache warriors, stories filled with fear, mistrust, and loss. But here, he reminded himself, was a human being in pain, not a soldier or enemy. As he drew closer, he noticed her injuries. Her leg was badly wounded, probably from a fall or a skirmish. She had blood on her clothes, and her breathing was heavy with pain. The cowboy's mind raced. He had some supplies in his pack that could help, but it would be difficult to treat her out here. Still, he could not leave her. She needed help, and he was the only person around for miles. He spoke softly, making sure his voice was gentle and calm. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. His voice carried across the small distance, careful not to startle her. The woman froze, her eyes wide and filled with fear. She tried to pull herself away, but her injury slowed her movements. The cowboy stayed where he was, showing no sudden motions, letting her see he meant no harm. Slowly, she lowered herself back to the ground, unsure but too exhausted to run. It took several moments for him to get close enough to help her without alarming her. He knelt down beside her, keeping his hands visible at all times. "Can you move?" he asked gently. She shook her head slightly, the pain evident in her expression. He realized she would not be able to walk on her own. He needed a plan, and fast. Using his coat as a makeshift sling, he helped lift her carefully. The weight was heavier than he expected, and he had to shift his stance several times to avoid straining himself. Every step was slow, deliberate, but he managed to keep her steady. His horse, sensing something was wrong, stayed close, whinnying softly but remaining calm. The journey back to his cabin would be difficult. The terrain was uneven, filled with hidden rocks and sudden drops. He could feel the strain in his muscles as he carried her, but he refused to stop. With every step, he reminded himself that she had nowhere else to go, and that she trusted him enough not to fight him. As they moved through the plains, the cowboy observed the woman more closely. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s, with strong features softened by the strain of pain and exhaustion. Her eyes were dark and alert, filled with a mix of fear and cautious curiosity. Despite her injuries, there was a quiet strength about her, a determination that told him she had survived much already. The morning passed slowly as they made their way back. The sun climbed higher, casting a harsh light across the dry earth. Sweat dripped down the cowboy's face, but he ignored it, focusing on each careful step. He could see the cabin in the distance, a small wooden structure nestled among the rocks and scrub. Safety was near, but he knew the hardest part was just beginning, tending to her wounds and gaining her trust. As they approached the cabin, the woman looked around nervously. She had never been this close to a settler's home, and the unfamiliar surroundings made her tense. The cowboy gently guided her inside, speaking softly to reassure her. "You're safe here," he said. "I'll take care of you." Her eyes met his for a brief moment, a flicker of relief crossing her face before she lowered her gaze again. Inside the cabin, the smell of wood smoke and the faint scent of dried herbs filled the air. The cowboy set her down carefully on a blanket and retrieved his first aid supplies. Bandages, water, and a few basic medicines would have to be enough for now. He worked quietly, focusing on cleaning her wounds and dressing them as best he could. Every motion was slow and deliberate, intended to avoid causing her further pain. Through it all, silence hung in the room, broken only by the occasional hiss of the fire and the soft sounds of the woman's breathing. The cowboy felt a mixture of exhaustion and determination. He knew this was only the beginning. Caring for her would be a challenge, and the days ahead would test him in ways he had not expected. But for now, he was content to do what he could. By the time he finished, the sun was high in the sky, casting bright light through the small cabin window. The woman rested quietly, her breathing more even, though her eyes never fully relaxed. The cowboy stepped back, wiping his hands on his coat and looking at her. There was still much to be done, but he had taken the first step. In that moment, he realized that life in the Wild West was full of surprises, and sometimes the greatest challenges were not the land, the animals, or even other men, but the unexpected ways in which humanity could appear, even in the most unlikely places. And so the cowboy stood in his cabin, looking at the woman he had found in the canyon, knowing that nothing in his quiet, solitary life would ever be the same again. The cabin was quiet, but the cowboy knew the silence would not last long. Outside, the wind whispered across the plains, carrying dust and dry leaves. The sunlight streamed through the small window, casting warm patterns across the wooden floor. The woman, still pale from her injury, lay on the blanket he had prepared, her eyes half closed. Despite the calm of the moment, tension hung in the air. She had survived something terrible, and he could see it in the way her body stiffened with even the slightest noise. The cowboy glanced around the cabin. Supplies were scarce, but he had what he needed for now: water, bandages, and a small box of herbs he had collected over the years. He sat near her, speaking softly as he worked. "I need to clean the wound again," he said gently. "It will hurt a little, but I promise it will help you get better." She flinched slightly, but did not resist. Slowly, he removed the old bandage and began carefully washing the wound. The woman bit her lip, fighting against the pain, and her dark eyes watched him with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. As he worked, the cowboy thought about the dangers they faced. Out here, the plains were not kind to anyone, and he knew that she could not stay long without risking attention. Apache warriors might come looking for her, settlers could report her presence, or wild animals could wander too close. He needed to decide what to do next, and quickly. Yet despite these worries, he kept his focus on the task at hand. Healing her was the first step, everything else would follow. Once the wound was cleaned and properly bandaged, he offered her some water. She accepted it hesitantly, her hands shaking slightly. He noticed how fragile she seemed, but also the quiet strength in her posture. Her eyes followed his every move, assessing him as if she were trying to decide whether he could be trusted. The cowboy met her gaze calmly, showing no anger, no judgment, only patience and care. The woman's breathing slowed, and she finally relaxed a little. "My name is Gita," she said softly, her voice low and cautious. The cowboy nodded, keeping his own voice calm and even. "I'm called Luke," he said. "I'll take care of you, Gita. You're safe here." She looked at him with a mixture of relief and disbelief, as if she could not yet trust the words entirely. The morning passed slowly, filled with small, careful movements. Luke checked the supplies in the cabin, preparing for a journey back into the plains if needed. He knew the healing process would be slow, and that Gita would need more than bandages. Food, water, and safety were all essential. He gave her small sips of water and a few pieces of dried meat he carried. She ate hesitantly, the unfamiliar taste making her pause, but hunger soon overcame caution. As the sun climbed higher, Luke tried to learn more about Gita without pushing too hard. "How did this happen?" he asked gently, trying to keep his tone neutral. She hesitated, her eyes darting toward the window. Finally, in a low voice, she spoke. "We were attacked in the canyon. I ran alone." Her voice trembled, but there was no false emotion. He could see that her story was real, that she had suffered, and that fear had guided every step she had taken since then. Luke nodded, understanding her silence. Words could not erase pain, and he knew better than to push. Instead, he focused on practical matters. He helped her sit up slowly, supporting her weight carefully. Her leg was weak, but she wanted to move. Together, they prepared a small area near the fire where she could rest without lying flat. The cabin was simple, with just a few pieces of furniture, but Luke had kept it clean and organized. The fire provided warmth, and he kept an eye on it while checking that Gita was comfortable. Time passed, and the bond between them began to form, subtle but real. Luke spoke softly, telling stories of his life on the plains, how he had learned to ride and hunt, and how he survived alone. He did not expect her to respond, but she listened, her dark eyes following every movement. Occasionally, she asked a question, hesitant but curious. "Do you ever leave this place?" she asked. Luke smiled faintly. "Sometimes, but I always come back. The plains are home. They are hard, but they are mine." She nodded slowly, as if trying to understand a way of life so different from her own. By midday, Luke realized that Gita needed more than just physical care. She needed reassurance that he was not a threat, that she could trust him. He moved slowly, avoiding sudden gestures, showing her that he respected her space. "You can ask me anything," he said. "I won't lie, I won't hurt you." She looked at him carefully, then nodded slightly, a silent agreement that she would try to trust him. The afternoon brought new challenges. Luke decided it was time to check the surrounding area. He needed to make sure there were no dangers nearby, settlers, wild animals, or anyone else who might cause trouble. He stepped outside, keeping a careful watch on the horizon. The plains were vast and empty, the wind carrying dust and dry leaves. The sun was high and harsh, but he ignored the discomfort, scanning the distance for movement. Nothing appeared. For now, they were alone, safe for a brief time in this wild, unpredictable land. When he returned, Gita was sitting near the fire, attempting to prepare some small herbs she had gathered in her travels. Luke watched her, noticing the care with which she handled them. She moved slowly, her hand shaking slightly, but there was a determination in her movements. It reminded him that she was strong, even in her vulnerable state. He did not speak, simply observing, allowing her to act on her own. As evening approached, the light softened, turning golden and warm. The plains outside glowed with the colors of sunset, and the wind carried the faint sound of distant animals. Luke and Gita sat together near the fire. She had grown a little more relaxed, though her legs still pained her. They shared a simple meal of dried meat and bread. The act of eating together, small and ordinary as it was, created a sense of companionship. Neither spoke much, but the silence was comfortable. Night came quickly in the wild, bringing a chill and the sounds of nocturnal creatures. Luke stoked the fire, keeping it burning bright, and helped Gita into a comfortable position under the blankets. He could see the fear in her eyes when she looked outside, but he stayed calm, showing her through his actions that there was nothing to fear. for now at least. Before sleeping, Luke spoke softly, almost to himself. "You're safe here tonight," he said. "No one will hurt you." Ida's eyes met his briefly, and in that fleeting glance he saw a mixture of relief and disbelief. She had survived a terrible attack, traveled alone through the plains, and now found herself in a stranger's cabin. Yet, for the first time in days, she seemed to believe that she might live through the night. Sleep came slowly, but eventually both found rest. Luke remained alert for most of the night, listening to the sounds outside, his hand resting on the rifle nearby. He knew that danger could come at any time, but for now, the world outside seemed quiet. The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows across the cabin walls. Ida slept fitfully, but each small movement of comfort reassured him that his efforts were not wasted. By morning, the first rays of sunlight filtered through the window once again. The plains glowed with a soft, golden light. Ida stirred, and Luke helped her sit up gently. She winced slightly, but her strength was returning bit by bit. They shared a small breakfast, and the sense of companionship between them grew. Words were still few, but understanding was building, a quiet, unspoken trust. Luke realized that the journey ahead would be long and difficult. Ida needed time to heal, and they both needed to learn how to rely on each other. But for the first time since he found her in the canyon, he felt a spark of hope. The plains were still vast and dangerous, but together they had a chance to face whatever challenges came next. And so, the day began with quiet determination. The cowboy and the wounded woman he had rescued prepared for the journey ahead. Though the wild lands of the West were unforgiving, and though danger waited around every bend, they had found a small moment of peace, and in that peace, the beginnings of trust, understanding, and perhaps a new life together. The morning air was crisp and cool as the cowboy. Luke helped Ida prepare for the journey ahead. Her leg was still weak, but the bandages he had applied were holding well, and her breathing had grown steadier. The plains stretched out endlessly before them, golden and wide under the rising sun. Luke adjusted his hat, checked the supplies, and looked at Ida, who was leaning on a small walking stick he had fashioned for her. "You're ready?" he asked gently. Ida nodded, gripping the stick tightly. Her dark eyes were cautious, but there was a spark of determination there, a quiet will to survive. She had traveled alone, injured and afraid, yet she was willing to face the unknown once more. Luke admired her strength, even as he knew the journey would be challenging. They left the cabin slowly, stepping into the open plains. The horse followed obediently, carrying their supplies. Luke moved carefully, supporting Ida whenever the ground became uneven. Every step had to be measured. The rough terrain could easily cause her to stumble. He knew that rushing was dangerous, not just for her, but for both of them. The plains were beautiful, but they were also unpredictable, filled with hidden rocks, sudden drops, and wild animals. The first part of their journey was quiet, filled with small, careful steps. Luke watched Ida closely, noticing the way she adjusted her movements, testing her strength with every step. Her breathing was steady, but he could see the strain in her face. "We'll take it slow," he said, keeping his tone calm. "There's no need to rush. The land will still be here tomorrow." She gave a faint nod, trusting him enough to follow his pace. As the morning passed, the sun rose higher, casting a harsh light across the dry earth. The heat pressed down on them, and Luke could feel the sweat running down his back. He offered Ida water from his flask, and she accepted gratefully. The small act of sharing water created a quiet bond between them. It was not just survival, it was trust, slowly forming with each careful step they took together. Despite the seemingly empty plains, Luke remained alert. The Wild West was rarely empty, and he knew danger could appear at any moment. Out here, people and animals alike moved unseen, and a single mistake could be fatal. As they navigated through a narrow valley, he paused, scanning the distant hills. Shadows shifted in the distance, most likely a herd of deer or perhaps coyotes, but he kept his senses sharp. His instincts, honed over years of riding alone, told him to be careful. Ida, for her part, was learning to trust Luke's experience. She followed his lead when the terrain became tricky, placing her weight carefully and adjusting her steps. Her leg, though still weak, was slowly regaining strength. Every few minutes Luke would pause to check on her, offering encouragement. "You're doing well," he said softly, "just a little further." She looked up at him, her eyes meeting his for a brief moment, and gave a small smile. It was a rare gesture of connection, one that warmed Luke in a way he had not expected. The afternoon brought new challenges. As they approached a small stream, Luke saw that the path ahead was uneven, with loose rocks and slippery mud near the water. He helped Ida carefully down the bank, supporting her weight as they crossed the shallow stream. The water was cool and refreshing, and they paused to drink and rest. Luke noticed how the sunlight reflected off the water, creating patterns that danced across the rocks. Even in such a harsh environment, there were moments of beauty, small reminders of the world beyond fear and pain. Their rest was brief, for they both knew the plains were unpredictable. Luke scanned the horizon, his eyes catching movement in the distance. A small group of birds took flight suddenly, startled by something unseen. He felt a twinge of caution. "Stay close," he whispered. Ida moved closer to him, trusting his instincts. They continued onward, every step deliberate, every glance searching for danger. As evening approached, the landscape changed. The hills grew steeper, the ground rougher, and the wind carried a sharper, cooler bite. Luke helped Ida climb over rocky outcroppings, her strength tested by every movement. The horse, patient and steady, carried their supplies without complaint. They moved slowly, taking breaks whenever necessary, and Luke made sure to keep her spirits up. "We're almost there," he said. "Just a little more." Ida nodded, her determination unwavering despite the strain. Night fell quickly over the plains, and the sky turned deep blue, scattered with stars. The cowboy found a small clearing near some rocks where they could rest safely. He built a small fire, its warm glow providing comfort against the chill. Ida sat near the fire, her blanket wrapped around her shoulders, and Luke tended to the horse. The crackling of the fire and the soft sounds of the night created a strange peace, a momentary pause in the harshness of their journey. Around the fire, Luke offered Ida some food. She ate slowly, the warmth of the meal comforting her body and spirit. They spoke little, but the quiet companionship was enough. Trust had begun to grow between them, fragile but real. Ida's eyes, once filled with fear, now held a faint glimmer of hope. Luke felt the weight of responsibility, but also a quiet pride in helping someone survive against such odds. The night, however, was not without its dangers. In the distance, Luke heard the howl of a coyote, a reminder that the plains were never truly safe. He kept the rifle close, alert for any movement. Ida watched him silently, her dark eyes wide and watchful. She had survived alone for so long, but now she was learning the value of having someone else nearby, someone who would protect her when she could not protect herself. Morning came again with the pale light of dawn spilling over the hills. Luke helped Ida stand, supporting her as they prepared to continue. Their legs were stiff from the previous day's travel, but determination pushed them forward. The plains seemed endless, yet each step brought them closer to safety. Luke encouraged her, praising her strength and resilience. "You're doing amazing," he said. "Soon we'll be out of these hills." As they moved onward, Ida began to speak more. Small words at first, questions about the land and the animals they passed. Luke answered patiently, explaining what he knew about the plains, the plants, and the wildlife. For the first time, they shared more than just survival. They shared understanding. The silence that had once been filled with fear was now filled with conversation, quiet but meaningful. By midday, they reached a plateau overlooking the valley below. The view was breathtaking, golden grass stretching as far as the eye could see, dotted with rocks and distant trees. Luke paused, letting Ida take in the sight. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. He nodded, smiling faintly. "It is. But we can't stay long. There's still a long way to go." The journey continued, each step testing their endurance and patience. Luke's experience and Ida's determination combined to keep them moving safely. They navigated rocky paths, crossed shallow streams, and avoided areas where the ground was unstable. Every movement was careful, every decision deliberate. Luke knew that one mistake could set them back, or worse, put them in danger. As evening approached, they found another small clearing for the night. Luke built the fire again, and they rested. Ida's leg was sore, but the steady progress gave her hope. She had survived alone for days, but now, with Luke's help, she felt a new sense of safety. The firelight flickered across their faces, and for a moment the hardships of the journey seemed far away. Luke looked at Ida and thought about how far they had come. The plains were unforgiving, and yet they had moved through them together. Trust had grown, step by step, word by word. He realized that this journey was more than just a physical test. It was a test of courage, patience, and the quiet bonds that could form between two people in the harshest of places. As the night deepened, they sat together by the fire, sharing the warmth and the small sense of accomplishment that came from surviving another day. The plains were still wild, the journey still long, but they had each other. And sometimes that was enough to face even the toughest challenges. The morning sun rose slowly over the hills, painting the plains in shades of gold and amber. Luke awoke first, as he often did, listening to the soft sounds of the wilderness. Birds chirped in the distance, and the wind rustled through the tall grasses. The fire from last night had burned down to glowing embers, and the air carried a cool, refreshing chill. He glanced at Ida, who was still asleep, her breathing steady. Her dark hair fell across her shoulders, and her face, though pale from her injury, seemed calmer than it had the day before. Luke quietly built a small fire, careful not to wake her. He prepared a simple breakfast of dried meat and a few slices of bread, keeping the fire low to avoid drawing attention. As he worked, he thought about the days ahead. The journey through the plains had tested them both, but now they had reached a part of the land that felt safer. They were closer to his cabin and more protected from danger. Yet, he knew that the real work had only just begun, healing Ida and helping her regain her strength. When Ida finally stirred, Luke offered her the meal. She ate slowly, her hands trembling slightly as she held the food. "You must eat," he said softly. "It will help you get stronger." She nodded, her eyes cautious but trusting. The simple act of sharing food created a quiet bond between them, one built on trust and mutual care. Luke noticed how much her eyes had changed since the day he first found her, once filled with fear, now showing a flicker of hope. After breakfast, Luke helped Ida wash her face with a small container of water he had brought. The water was cold, and she flinched at first, but soon relaxed. Her movements were careful, her body still weak from the injury, but the simple act of cleaning herself seemed to lift her spirits. Luke watched her quietly, appreciating the small moments that marked progress. Every step toward recovery, no matter how minor, was important. Once Ida was cleaned, Luke began attending to her wound again. He removed the old bandage, cleaned the cut carefully, and applied a new dressing. Ida winced, but did not protest. She had begun to trust him, and that trust made the process easier for both of them. As he worked, Luke spoke softly, telling her what he was doing. "This will hurt a little," he warned, "but it will help you heal faster." She nodded, her dark eyes focused on his every move. The hours passed slowly, filled with small, careful tasks. Luke cleaned the cabin, prepared more food, and arranged the supplies they would need for the next part of their journey. Ida rested on the blanket, occasionally asking questions about the land, the animals, and the people who lived in the plains. Luke answered patiently, explaining what he knew about the wilderness, the plants that could be used for medicine, and the dangers they might face. Their conversation was simple, but it helped bridge the gap between them, building understanding and trust. By midday, Ida felt strong enough to move around the cabin. Luke helped her to stand, supporting her weight carefully. She walked slowly, her steps cautious but determined. Luke stayed close, offering encouragement. "You're doing very well," he said. "Your strength is returning." Ida smiled faintly, a small but meaningful gesture that showed how much progress she had made. As they moved around the cabin, Luke noticed that Ida was beginning to relax. The fear and tension that had been so obvious in her eyes were slowly giving way to a sense of calm. She began to help with small tasks, such as fetching water or arranging supplies. Each act, no matter how minor, was a step toward independence and recovery. Luke watched her carefully, feeling a quiet pride in her resilience. The afternoon brought a new challenge. Luke realized that Ida needed more than physical healing. She needed reassurance that she was safe and that he was not a threat. He sat down beside her, speaking softly and calmly. "You are safe here," he said. "No one will hurt you while you are with me, I promise." Ida looked at him, her dark eyes searching his face for truth. After a long moment, she nodded slightly, a silent acknowledgement that she believed him. With trust growing between them, Luke began teaching Ida small survival skills. He showed her how to gather firewood, identify edible plants, and track animals. At first, she was hesitant, but she quickly picked up the skills. Her movements became more confident, her eyes brighter with curiosity and understanding. Luke was patient, explaining each step carefully, and she followed his instructions closely. As evening approached, Luke and Ida prepared a small meal together. The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows across the cabin walls. They ate in companionable silence, the warmth of the fire and the shared meal creating a sense of comfort and security. Luke noticed that Aita's smiles were becoming more frequent, her laughter soft but genuine. For the first time since he had found her, she seemed to feel a sense of normalcy, even in the midst of the harsh wilderness. After dinner, they sat together near the fire, watching the stars appear in the clear night sky. Luke spoke softly, telling stories of his past, of the plains, and of the lessons he had learned while living alone. Ida listened intently, asking questions and offering her own observations. Their conversation flowed naturally, a quiet bond forming through shared stories and experiences. The fear that had once dominated their interactions was replaced by understanding and respect. The night was calm, but Luke remained vigilant. He checked the surroundings, ensuring that the cabin and its occupants were safe. The wind carried faint sounds from the plains, the rustle of grass, and the distant calls of animals. He knew that danger could appear at any moment, but for now, there was peace. Ida slept more soundly than the previous nights, her breathing even and steady. Luke felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that his efforts had made a difference. The following morning, the routine continued. Luke helped Ida rise and they shared a simple breakfast. He checked her wound, applied fresh bandages, and encouraged her to move around the cabin to strengthen her leg. Each small step was a victory, and Aida's confidence grew. She began to speak more freely, asking questions about the land, the animals, and even Luke's life. Their conversations became longer and more comfortable, a sign that trust and friendship were deepening. As the days passed, Luke and Aida worked together to make the cabin more comfortable. They organized supplies, collected water, and tended to the fire. Aida began to participate more actively, her movements stronger and more confident. Luke noticed the change in her demeanor. She laughed more, smiled more, and even teased him occasionally. The quiet companionship they shared became a source of strength for both of them. One afternoon, Luke decided to test Aida's progress. He led her outside, guiding her to a small hill nearby. The climb was challenging, but with his support, she reached the top. From there, they could see the surrounding plains stretching endlessly in every direction. The view was breathtaking, and Aida's eyes widened in awe. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Luke nodded, smiling. "It is, and now you can see how far you've come." She looked at him, a mixture of gratitude and wonder in her expression. As the sun began to set, they returned to the cabin, tired but satisfied. The fire was lit, and they prepared a simple meal together. Luke noticed that Aida was more confident than ever, her movements fluid and purposeful. The bond between them had grown stronger, built on trust, care, and shared experiences. The fear that had once dominated her eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of security and understanding. That night, as they sat near the fire, Luke reflected on the journey they had taken together. From the moment he found Aida in the canyon, wounded and alone, to this point of recovery and trust, they had faced many challenges. Yet, through patience, care, and understanding, they had overcome them. He realized that the Wild West, though harsh and unforgiving, also offered opportunities for connection, compassion, and hope. Aida, for her part, had begun to see Luke not just as a helper or protector, but as a companion. The cabin, the fire, and the shared tasks had created a sense of normalcy and safety she had not known for many days. Her trust in him had grown, and with it, her confidence and resilience. The hardships they had faced together had forged a quiet bond, one that would guide them through the challenges still ahead. As the night deepened, they sat together in silence, the fire crackling and the stars shining brightly overhead. The plains were still vast and wild, but within the small cabin there was warmth, safety, and understanding. Luke knew that the journey was far from over, but for now they had found a moment of peace, a chance to heal, and a beginning of trust and friendship that would carry them through whatever lay ahead. The morning sun broke through the horizon, casting long shadows across the plains. Luke stirred first, as usual, listening to the quiet sounds of the wilderness. The cabin felt warmer than ever, the fire from the night before having left glowing embers that still held heat. Aida was already awake, sitting near the window and watching the sunrise. Her leg had grown stronger with each passing day, and she moved with more confidence now. There was a quiet determination in her eyes, a mix of gratitude, curiosity, and cautious hope. Luke prepared a small breakfast while Aida looked on. The morning air carried a crisp freshness, and the cabin smelled faintly of wood smoke and cooked food. He handed her a piece of bread and some dried meat, and she ate slowly, savoring each bite. "You're doing very well," he said softly, his voice calm and steady. "Soon you'll be able to walk without help." Ida nodded, a small smile touching her lips. It was a rare moment of peace, one that felt almost magical after the trials they had faced together. After breakfast, Luke helped Ida get ready for the journey back to her people, or at least, back to the land where she belonged. The plains stretched endlessly before them, golden and warm in the morning light. Luke checked the horse, adjusting the saddle and ensuring the supplies were secure. He had taught Ida how to carry herself, how to balance her weight, and how to trust her own strength again. She was ready, and he knew it. As they set out, the landscape felt different. The plains were still wild and unpredictable, but there was a sense of purpose now. Every step Ida took was careful, but confident. She had grown stronger physically and emotionally, and the fear that had once dominated her expression was gone. Luke walked beside her, his hand occasionally resting gently on her shoulder for support. The bond between them was unspoken but powerful, built through shared struggle, care, and trust. The journey through the plains was not easy. Rocks and uneven ground forced them to move slowly, and the sun beat down relentlessly. Luke guided Ida carefully, watching her every movement. They paused frequently, drinking water and resting in the shade of scattered trees. The horse carried their supplies without complaint, its steady presence a comforting part of the journey. Despite the hardships, the journey felt lighter than before, filled with quiet companionship and shared purpose. As the day progressed, Luke noticed distant figures on the horizon. At first, he could not be sure who they were. His instincts, honed by years in the wild, warned him to be cautious. He motioned for Ida to stay close and moved ahead slightly to get a better view. The figures were moving steadily, and Luke realized they were settlers, perhaps traveling through the plains, unaware of his presence. He relaxed slightly, knowing they posed no immediate danger, but he remained alert. The plains could change in an instant, and he was determined to keep Ida safe. By late afternoon, they reached a small ridge overlooking a wide valley. The view was breathtaking, golden grasses stretching as far as the eye could see, dotted with trees and distant hills. Ida paused, taking in the sight. Her eyes widened and she let out a soft whisper, "It's beautiful." Luke nodded, smiling faintly. "It is," he said, "and soon you will be back where you belong. But I need you to stay careful." She turned to him, gratitude and respect shining in her eyes. For the first time since they had met, she felt a sense of hope for the future. As they descended into the valley, the terrain became more challenging. Loose rocks and hidden dips required careful navigation. Luke supported Ida as she moved, offering encouragement and guidance. "One step at a time," he said. "You're stronger than you think." She nodded, drawing on the strength she had built over the past days. The journey was still difficult, but each step forward felt like a victory. Suddenly, a distant sound caught their attention, the faint, rhythmic beat of drums carried on the wind. Luke froze, alert and cautious. Ida's eyes widened in recognition. "My people," she whispered, a mix of fear and longing in her voice. Luke understood immediately. They were approaching her tribe, and the moment of decision had arrived. He could see the conflict in her expression, relief at nearing safety, but uncertainty about what would come next. They continued carefully, moving toward the sound. The closer they got, the clearer the figures became. A small group of Apache warriors moving along the plains, their movements purposeful but not aggressive. Ida's breathing quickened, and she looked to Luke. "Will they accept me?" she asked softly. Luke hesitated. "They may be cautious," he said, "but you have survived. That alone shows strength. Trust yourself." She nodded, gathering courage from his words. As they approached the group, one of the warriors stepped forward. His eyes were sharp, his posture alert. Ida spoke in her own language, her voice trembling slightly. The cowboy stayed back, giving her space, yet remaining close enough to intervene if necessary. The warrior listened, then motioned to the others. Slowly they approached Ida, surrounding her but not threatening her. Luke could see the recognition and relief in her expression. She had returned to her people, and they had accepted her. The reunion was quiet but filled with emotion. Ida embraced her people, her tears flowing freely. Luke watched, feeling a mix of pride, relief, and sadness. He had helped her survive, helped her regain strength, and now she was back where she belonged. It was a moment of triumph, one that marked the end of their shared journey and the beginning of a new chapter for Ida. The Apache leader approached Luke, speaking in halting English. "You saved her life," he said. "For that we are grateful." Luke nodded humbly. "I only did what was right," he replied. "She needed help and I gave it." The leader studied him carefully, then offered a slight nod of respect. It was a quiet acknowledgement, but it carried weight. In the harsh world of the plains, actions mattered more than words, and Luke's actions had proven his character. Ida turned to Luke, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Luke smiled faintly, feeling a warmth he had not expected. "Take care of yourself," he said. "You're strong now, you can face whatever comes next." She nodded, her expression determined. They shared a brief, silent moment, one filled with understanding and respect. Though their paths would now diverge, the bond they had formed would remain. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with deep shades of orange and purple, Luke prepared to leave. He mounted his horse, glancing back at Ida and her people. She waved softly, and he waved in return. The plains stretched before him, vast and open, yet he felt a quiet satisfaction. He had faced danger, uncertainty, and the unknown, and he had helped someone survive and regain hope. That was a victory worth more than any hunt or conquest. Luke rode off into the sunset, the wind carrying the dust behind him. The plains were still wild, unpredictable, and sometimes dangerous, but he had learned something important. Courage, compassion, and trust could change lives, even in the harshest of places. Ida's survival and return to her people was a testament to the power of patience, care, and understanding. As night fell, the stars appeared above the plains, twinkling like tiny fires in the sky. Luke rode steadily, feeling the weight of the day's events, but also a sense of fulfillment. The journey had been difficult, but it had brought lessons that would stay with him forever. The value of helping others, the strength found in trust, and the quiet power of human connection. In the distance, Ida's people settled near a small stream, their faces filled with relief and gratitude. She moved among them, her steps strong and confident, no longer burdened by fear or injury. The plains, though still wild and dangerous, now held the promise of safety, community, and hope for her future. Luke continued riding, the horizon stretching endlessly before him. He thought of the journey they had shared, the dangers they had faced, and the trust they had built. It had been a journey of survival, growth, and connection, a journey that had changed both of them forever. And though they would follow separate paths from this moment, the experience would remain in their hearts, a quiet testament to courage, compassion, and the unbreakable spirit of those who face the wild and survive. The plains were quiet now, the night deep and still. Luke rode on, carrying with him the memory of a wounded woman who had survived against all odds, and of the quiet bond that had formed in the heart of the Wild West. For both of them, the journey had ended, but its lessons would last a lifetime.